The Maryland Terrapins win, but are unranked?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and thank you for making us part of your day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Maryland Terrapins look scary after beating the Indiana Hoosiers 44-17. The Maryland Terrapins have won their fifth straight game of the season, and the Terps crushed the Hoosiers in a game that was never in a doubt. Another game, another blowout for the Maryland Terrapins. We were the better team. We were the better team through and through. We were the better team at pretty much every level of the game. We were better coached. We had better players. We were better recruited. We had better offense, better defense. Just about everything you look at, the Maryland Terrapins did better than the Indiana Hoosiers, and we were clearly just a better program. And we are 5-0 after beating Indiana 44-17 for the first time since 2001. The Maryland Terrapins are 5-0. That's a really big deal. I went back and looked at the 2001 season when they were 5-0 because I was interested at exactly what season that was and where the program was. In 2001, I was not born then, so I didn't know a ton about it. I had a basic idea of it. But during that time, if you guys don't know what the 2001 season was, the Terps were still in the ACC. You can't forget the Terps have not always been a Big Ten team. They were in the ACC at that point. So they were still in the ACC at that time in 2001. And that 2001 team went 10-1 in the regular season. 10-1 in the regular season would look awesome for this year's Maryland Terrapins. Obviously, I don't think it's going to happen, and a lot would have to go right. But you never know. Who knows what could happen? But that team in 2001 went 10-1 the regular season, and they won the ACC championship that year, and their only loss that year was to the Florida State Seminoles. So they were a top 10 team in the country. They were kind of one of the best teams. They were one of the best teams in the country with that top 10 ranking, and they got into a good bowl game, but they ended up losing that game. But it's cool to see that the Maryland Terrapin program was once a top 10 ranked program in the country, and it shows that this is the first time that we've started 5-0. And since that time, it's a humongous deal. A humongous deal. It's the first time in the Coach Locksley era that we've started 5-0. We have a chance to have our best season since who knows when. And this team is special, the way that Coach Locksley has recruited, the way he's coached this team. And then just at the end of the day, you have the talent. Talent wins games. And we have the talent too in the way this meshes, the leadership, the seniors, everything that we have, and it all showed out against Indiana. We have everything we need to get to 9 wins, to get to 10 wins, and to really take another step as a Maryland program. And who knows what's going to happen next year with Taulia gone and a lot of our impact seniors gone. We could take a step back realistically, but we're going to enjoy this year and Coach Locksley's best year yet in this win against Indiana, 44-17 in a battle that was not close at all. One thing I didn't understand, which I want to talk about really quick, was why Taulia was in the game in the fourth quarter after we were absolutely crushing them. It wasn't a close game. I thought Taulia could come out midway through the third, but Taulia was still in there in the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, and ended up playing the whole entire game. And I wanted to get him out. I knew we had Ohio State the next week, and I know Coach Locksley knows we have Ohio State the next week. And I could not imagine how disappointed the fans would be if some reason, somehow, Taulia ended up getting injured. God forbid. That didn't happen, but I couldn't understand why we didn't take him out, why we were crushing the Hoosiers. I would love to see Billy Edwards get some snaps just in case he has to come in. We know Taulia has been injury prone. We know he's a small guy. He's not the biggest guy. He's not going to be able to take a ton of hits before getting injured. We know he's been injured last year. We know Billy Edwards had to make a couple starts last year. We know Taulia came back too early last year. So I wouldn't mind seeing Billy Edwards get a couple snaps for himself. But that was the end of the game. Let's talk about another Maryland fast start for the Terps. If you remember, one of the biggest criticisms, along with the run game and rotating too many players in and out, from me was the slow starts. Against Virginia, if you recall, we went down 14-0 when their freshman quarterback had a flea flicker for a touchdown. Next thing you know, we're down 14-0 against a bad Virginia team. Against Charlotte, we went down 14-0. They get a huge play on their first possession on a coverage breakdown by Jaquan Shepard. And then Taulia throws a pick six. Next thing you know, we're looking at a 14-0 hole against Virginia and against Charlotte. But this did not happen against Indiana. Jayshon Jones, first play of the game, 62 yards. And then quickly, Felton screen, touchdown. And before you know it, the Terps are up 14-0 instead of being down 14-3. Indiana did get a field goal on one of their first possessions, but they were up 21-3 at the beginning of the second quarter. So another fast start against Indiana, and it did happen also against Michigan State. It was a fast start against Michigan State also, but the Terps slowed down. So pretty much throughout the season, besides, you could say Towson, and besides Indiana, we've either started slow or we ended slow. But this time, I think we kind of played a balanced entire game against the Indiana Hoosiers. So it was great to see that happen, and I thought that needed to be fixed. But the Terps didn't stop when they scored 21 at the beginning of the second quarter. They continued to go on and scored 23 more points throughout the game, thanks to Taulia's 5 touchdown and to Ty Felton, who we'll talk about later, who had 3 touchdowns on a career day. But also a big day from Jayshon Jones, who had above 100 yards. And Caden Prather had 4 catches for 45 yards. So it was a really solid day from those trio wide receivers, and that room is looking deep. But the defense also played a very solid game, only allowing 17 points. We got their quarterback bench. We forced another turnover, which we've been doing every game basically. So hopefully we don't drop from being the number 1 forced turnover team in the country. I think we'll stay up there. But they only gave up 200 yards passing, which a lot of people might look at that and be like, okay, that is pretty good, but it's not like crazily good. But it is a very good number, and I'll tell you why. Because Indiana was down early. So when a team goes down early, you see that sometimes they can throw for big numbers because the defense will soften up a little bit. They don't want to give up the big play, but also they just can't run the ball as much. It's just too much time off the clock. You have to get back in the game. You need some big plays, so you're pretty much throwing the ball a ton. And so Indiana, even though they went down, they still ended up throwing the ball a ton. So 200 yards passing was not a bad number at all. And they did rush for 116 yards, but it was only for a 3.1 average. So a really good day from the defense, a really good day from the offense. And the Terps also covered the spread of 14.5 points. I predicted that they would. But 14.5 points is not an easy spread to cover. There can be some things that just happen at the end of the game where you look at it and, it's 14-28 instead of 42-14 or something like that. It's easy for a team not to cover the spread, and Vegas is usually very good at those lines. So for the Maryland Terrapins to continue and continuously cover the spread, it's a really good sign for things to come. But a balanced game, and the Terps are absolutely looking scary, and they are looking like a top 25 team in the entire country. Or are they a top 25 team in the country? We'll get into that after this ad from the Athletic Brewing Company. Now time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by the Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Taulia Tagovailoa, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. You don't have to worry about hangovers. I've talked to many people in the Locked On community, and they say they taste great. They're the fastest growing non-alcoholic brewery in the U.S., so get on board. You can find Athletic Brewing's code non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers use Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. That's code Locked On at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com near beer. Exclusion and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times. The Maryland Terrapins are not ranked after being 5-0. This is completely different. This is completely disrespectful to the Maryland Terrapins. And no world that Maryland Terrapins should not be ranked right now. And there was a huge outcry from the Maryland media, from just college football people, from fans, from normal supporters, from experts. People were talking about how on earth are the Maryland Terrapins not ranked in the top 25. And I have to agree with those people. After beating Virginia 14-42, after beating Michigan State 31-9, after beating Indiana 44-17, being one of the hottest teams in college football, having one of the best offenses in football, having one of the best quarterbacks in college football, not having a close game yet, covering the spread 4 out of 5 times, which I think is a really important point to make. That means we're exceeding expectations of what the Vegas people put on us or what the number is people think that we can cover. That means we're exceeding those expectations. So I think that should absolutely mean we're in the top 25, but 3 straight Power 5 wins, and we're not in the top 25. I guarantee almost every Big Ten team, if they were 5-0 right now, if it wasn't Maryland, pretty much all of them, maybe you can make an argument that a team like Rutgers might not be, or a team like Northwestern might not be in the top 25 if they were 5-0. But basically, all the Big Ten teams, if they were 5-0 at Maryland's schedule, I guarantee they would put them in the top 25. And I understand they're against subpar opponents, but I really want to hone in now. We have covered the spread every single time except for one game against Charlotte, which we almost covered the spread again. But the teams ranked ahead of us, I can make a really solid argument that the Maryland Terrapins could absolutely be in front of those teams. I don't see what the voters were saying. I went deep into it last night preparing for this podcast, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you why the teams that are ahead of us should not be ahead of us. Starting with Louisville, 1 spot ahead of us at 25. This one really upset me, and I'm looking at it, and I just can't understand it. If we look at what Louisville has done, being 1 spot ahead of us, what's Maryland's biggest knock right now going into Week 6 against Ohio State, and why we aren't ranked, and why people could argue that we shouldn't be ranked? We haven't played really anyone. We haven't played an amazing team yet. We haven't. We've played subpar Big Ten opponents, and we played one of the worst teams in the ACC in Virginia. But Louisville's schedule doesn't look great. Let me read out Louisville's schedule. Georgia Tech, they're not very good. Murray State, they're not good. Indiana, we know what we just did to Indiana. We just beat them 44-17. Boston College, they're a pretty bad team. And then you look at NC State. NC State's a solid team, but that isn't close to a gauntlet. And then you start to really dig into it, and I was really looking at it last night, and I'm looking at the screen, and I see the Maryland Terrapin, the same Maryland Terrapin team that just beat Indiana 44-17. 44-17. Louisville beat them 21-14 in a pretty close back and forth game. So Louisville put up 21 against them compared to the Maryland Terrapins 44 points against them. Louisville gave up 300 yards to Taven Jackson, the quarterback that got benched against us, that couldn't do anything against our defense. While we gave up 113 yards to Taven Jackson, Maryland averaged 8.3 yards per play against Indiana, while Louisville only averaged 6.8 yards in the game. So they barely beat the Indiana Hoosiers, who we just beat 44-17. I feel like if I was a voter, I would give us the edge. I'm not going to act like nobody's voting for us. We have a ton of votes this week. We're the 26th team in the country, which is it's a good place to be. It's not a bad place to be at all. If I told you that we were the 26th team in the country going into Ohio State, you'd be like, okay, I'll probably take it before the season. But the whole goal was 5-0 going into Ohio State, and that's exactly what we did. But that team beat the same team we just crushed by 7 points, and their quarterback, Indiana's quarterback, looked good against them. It's hard for me to, just from that one fact, justify them being ahead of us if we have the same record, a similar schedule. And then, I was like, I don't really know, but let's look into some other games. I don't really see how they could be in front of us with just looking at that. But then I'm looking at it. Everyone has a bad game. So I was like, okay, let me look at the other games. They barely beat NC State last week. I actually watched that game. It was on a Friday night. Didn't have much to do. I turned on that game. I watched it. And Louisville barely beat them 13-10 to a team who put up 200 total yards. They could only beat by 3 points. Yes, NC State had 200 total yards against them. Couldn't do anything on offense. They were down at halftime 10-0. At the end of the day, that doesn't quite matter. It's really what happened in the game. But 13-10 to NC State, a team who was 3-2 and a not very good team. They're decent, but they're nothing special. It's hard. It's really hard for me to put that Louisville team ahead of us. And then Fresno State is at 24. And I was looking at them. They beat Eastern Washington. A team that is not special, is not a good team. They beat them by 1 point. A team I think the Maryland Terrapins would crush. They beat that team by 1 point. And Eastern Washington is 2-3, and they're a pretty bad team. And then Fresno State beat Purdue by 4, another team in the Big Ten that hasn't been that great. So you can keep going down the list. You could look at LSU. It's hard for me to sit here and be like, oh, Maryland should be in front of LSU. But in terms of resume and everything, if we're not just like, oh, LSU has more talent, because they do. They have more dudes. Harold Perkins, their quarterback is really good, Daniels. They have a ton of guys. Malik Neighbors, insane wide receiver, is going to be a first-round pick. Okay, LSU has a ton of guys, a ton of good players. But if you're looking at the resume and not the recruiting ranks, LSU has 2 losses. They're 3-2. Maryland's 5-0. And if you really go into it, are you going to put a 2-loss LSU team ahead of us? Do they really deserve to be in there in front of us? I don't know. But I know that Fresno State should not be in front of us, absolutely should not be ahead of us. And I know that Louisville, I was blanking on the other team behind us. Louisville should not be ahead of us. But we are the 2016 best team in the country, and we're receiving 81 votes currently, but we should be in the top 25. And it's not like you just take a quick peek at us and you're like, who do they have? Like it's a fluky top 25 team. Like, no, we got draft picks on our defense. We have one of the best quarterbacks in college football. We have the second running back on Mel Kiper's board. We have arguably one of the best Big Ten wide receiver groups and one of the wide receiver groups in the whole entire country. We got guys all over the place. It's not like it's like a fluky 5-0. But let's look at the bright side before we end the segment. I kind of like us going into Ohio State without that number next to us. It makes us want to be extra motivated. We're going to have more of a purpose in this game. And the Terrapins are going to be out to prove the entire country wrong about Maryland Terrapins football. We didn't get our offensive and defensive MVPs yet. My favorite segment of the week. You guys waited for it. Who are the offensive and defensive MVPs for the Maryland Terrapins? I will tell you after this ad from FanDuel and a message from the Locked On community. College football season is here, and this season, Locked On is kicking up your coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Let's get into the offensive, defensive, and I have an overall MVP because I wanted to add an extra player in. I was like, there's got to be 3 MVPs. Sometimes it's too hard to pick. So the overall MVP, the MVP of the whole entire team, I'm going with Ty Felton, who had a career day. 7 receptions for 134 yards and 3 touchdowns for the junior wide receiver who was absolutely came and is a ride. Ty Felton is here, and it looks good, and I love to see it. We didn't think Ty Felton was going to be a top 3 wide receiver coming into this year. He was overshadowed by Tyrese Chambers coming in and Caden Prather, 6'4", coming in from West Virginia. But Ty Felton is actually our second leading receiver right now. He's 6'2", can move, can separate, congested catches, and Taulia loves to throw it for him and throw it to him. This is the second week Ty Felton has gotten some type of MVP from me in terms of the offensive and defensive MVP. He got offensive MVP last week against Michigan State when he led our team in receiving yards. And now Ty Felton is number 8 in the Big Ten in receiving. If he continues to do some of these special things, he could potentially push for honorable Big Ten. I'm not going to say he's going to be first team or second team, but I think he can push to be an honorable Big Ten player. And let's go through what he did last year. Last year, 23 receptions for 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. Guess what he's done through 5 games? I love this. It shows improvement. It shows jump. It shows what Coach Loxley has done, what our wide receiver, Coach Brewery, has developed. And this year, through 5 games, he's 18 receptions for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So through 5 games, he's basically already matched his entire season last year, and he did play last year. He wasn't like our number 1 wide receiver, but he played a good amount last year. So him already having 300 yards and already passing his touchdown total, it shows he's worked hard, he's improved, and now he's one of our leading wide receivers and absolutely has a chance next year to take on a huge role. Now let's get into our offensive MVP, Taulia Tagovailoa. At first, I was just going to give offensive and defensive MVP and give Ty Felton offensive and then defensive MVP to someone else. But I was like, Taulia played too well for me not to recognize him. If the offense plays well, you can probably give Taulia the MVP every week. But 24-34 for 352 yards and 70% completion and 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions and 15 yards on the ground and a touchdown on the ground. I can't not give him the offensive MVP this game. But 5 touchdowns is a pretty big and awesome number to have. And He continues to lead the Big Ten in passing yards for the season and passing touchdowns, the two biggest stats that people look at, with 1,464 yards and 13 touchdowns. The next closest in terms of touchdowns is J.J. McCarthy with 10 touchdowns. So Taulia is obviously playing really well. The defensive MVP, I honestly had trouble. I didn't know really what direction I wanted to go to. There was a bunch of guys that made some good plays, but I didn't see one guy that was like, he's the defensive MVP. So I decided to give it to the entire linebacker room. If you missed the game, or if you didn't miss the game, Jay-Sean Barham was out. Maybe our most talented player on the whole entire team. He was out. Our talented linebacker, who was a freshman All-American last year and who's I hope has a big game next week against Ohio State, he was out. So the entire linebacker room had to step up without the playmaking of Barham in, and that's exactly what they did. Caleb Wheatland stepped up with no Barham, had a really nice sack, and the sophomore continues to play really well. And then Gote also stepped up with 4 tackles and an interception. And then Ruben Hippolyte, the other linebacker, was second on the team in tackles, was all over the place, and he has really picked up his play and was a really good player. So overall, I gave it to that entire linebacker room who had a sack, the second leading tackler, and an interception. I absolutely was ecstatic with what the linebacker room did and where that linebacker room is. It's one of the best in the Big Ten. It's a loaded linebacker room. But thanks for listening today to Locked On Terps. Please like and subscribe. We're here every single day talking about the Maryland Terrapins. But we'll see you next time. And thanks for listening to Locked On Terps.